Good morning and welcome to the University of Florida Ona Research Facility. And this building that the group of people I'm looking at out in the audience a lot of them are really devoted members of the staff here at Ona. And I'm particularly proud about Ona is because we're not too far from Ona, and I'm on the advisory board along with about 5 or 6 other ranchers that we work with Ona on funding and projects and anything we can do as ranchers to help here at Ona. So again, it's about a 3,000 acre cow-calf research facility, and they do a lot of water quality sampling. They do a lot of forage work. They do a lot of genetic work. They develop the white Angus breed of the United States here. You haven't heard too much about it, but you probably will in the future. So welcome to Ona. So this happens to be a picture of a longleaf pine forest down in South Florida, and off in the distance is the Myakka River. I am from the Myakka City area, Manatee County in particular, so we might focus a little bit on our watershed in Manatee County and what's going on there, but keep in mind that it's going to affect a lot of folks elsewhere in different areas of drainage. So whether you're in the Northern Everglades, St. John's, it will all flow together, so to speak. So this is part of the process. So when we got involved in looking at conservation easements, we ran into a small problem with funding. That back in the day, there was Amendment 1 that was passed. About 75% of the folks here in Florida voted for it, and now we're into a little, if you will, issue with interpretation of the statute. That a lot of folks seem to think that it would go for conservation easement funding, fee simple purchases. Fee simple is strictly buying the land as opposed to just buying the development rights. So when that happened, we partnered with Julie Morris and the National Wildlife Refuge Association, which I can't say enough about what National Wildlife Refuge Association has done here in Florida, across the state, with helping facilitate conservation easements and protecting our water. But basically, we are a landowner group, with Julie Morris as president of the group because she truly has the scientific knowledge to lead our group. What we do is we advocate for funding for these programs. And in the old days, you might find that you would have 200 million or 300 million in the pot for conservation easements in Florida Forever or rural family lands in the state. And then we went into the recession in the state of Florida, and everybody in Tallahassee was, of course, looking for different ways to stop the bleeding, if you will, of the recession in Florida. And it appears like some of the funds were directed to something other than conservation easement funding, and we are trying to get that funding back. So our group is made up of landowners, and they represent about 3 million acres in the state of Florida. So we go from the Everglades all the way up to Georgia and Alabama line with groups of ranchers, whether they're families, corporations, and they're small and large ranches. So we're not just the landscape level big ranches. We represent everybody on trying to advocate for funding. So what we'd ask is they lend their voices to our efforts, and that we cannot have fundraisers for politicians, but they can. And when you do talk to politicians that are running for office or in office, is always ask them what their viewpoint is on conservation funding. So it might be conservation easement funding, it might be other funding, but always try to see if that's in line what you hold dear as ranchers or landowners in Florida. And what we're going to be talking about today is really the funding mechanisms that I'm familiar with. And this is a rancher's perspective, so you're going to get my perspective. And I'm going to try to answer all your questions I can towards the end of the session. But we're looking at state rural family lands funding through the Florida Department of Agriculture, which is a little more lenient, if you will, a little more friendly to changing uses. So from pasture to hayfields to row crop and back. That is one of the conservation easement entities we're going to be looking at. And the other one is Florida Forever, which Florida Forever was great. And a lot, in fact, goes back to Senator Bradley, that he helped fund right at $100 million. And there's a percentage of that are going to be going to fee simple purchases that are needed and conservation easements. On the other hand, the Rural Family Lands Program, which got $10 million last year, which was really, truly a drop in the bucket, this year only got $5.8 million. So $5.8 million in landscape of Florida and the values that are on land doesn't go very far. So another thing that Florida Conservation Group does is we partnered with I will call it the mothership, the large organization is the Florida Cattlemen's Association, that all of our members are members of Florida Cattlemen's Association, and they do a great job lobbying up in Tallahassee for our interests. The problem is that it takes so much to lobby for a specific project, like getting $100 million for this project and $100 million for that project, the two, if you will, state conservation easement programs with Florida Forever and with Rural Family Lands, that we just don't have the time in the midst of them representing all the other items that we need to look out for our industry to give it enough time. So that's part of why we formed it, and that is part of the reason why Florida Cattlemen's Association endorses us. So we also do op-eds. In the last 24 months, there's been 18 op-eds in major newspapers across Florida, and essentially we will use a rancher, say Tommy Clay, which got a conservation easement from North Florida. Wes Williamson in Okeechobee will be featured, maybe in the Miami Herald. I was featured in the Sarasota Herald. So we try to maximize the exposure that we can through doing informational and educational aspects of these conservation easements here in Florida. So what are the benefits? Because we've had several comments. One is why, and these are coming from, if you will, our lawmakers, our politicians. And one of which I heard was, why would I give money to somebody that needs to be doing what they're doing regardless? Well, it goes back to a lot of property rights, and it goes back to family. And you know, you own the land and you're trying to do something for the future of your family. You're trying to do something good for conservation. You know, you're just trying to do what you think's right, but by the same token, it is a business decision to do that. And simply donating all your development rights off your ranch because it's the right thing to do really doesn't play to what we as Americans and landowners try to do. But doing these conservation easements, it is so good for the state because they protect the drinking water supply, the quantity and the quality. And if you think about it, we're in a state with a high growth. Usually raw land is going up 10 to 15% a year whenever we're not in the middle of a recession. And in saying that, you can then buy for approximately 50% of the value if you're the citizens of Florida, and if you're the governmental entities, that for essentially for a little bit you pay now, you can protect a lot in the future. So looking down the road, now that we in Florida live in the world of blue algae and red tide, there's a lot of those things that with the right money spent in the right spots, and it's not a silver bullet for those, that conservation easements can, for approximately 50% of the value of that dirt on that day, can protect a lot of land in the future. So the management cost then, if under a conservation easement, instead of being with the state or the federal government at approximately, and I've seen some figures that run from $10 to $38 an acre per year to manage raw land, to make sure that land is taken care of, to do those things. We, if you will, ranchers, can then take care of that land because we have a legal instrument which says we gave up these rights, But now we have to abide by the rules that were set forth in that document, that legal instrument. And so we now bear the brunt of taking care of that land. So I think that these programs are really beneficial. They're critical to protect the natural areas of Florida, our food supply, our water supply, our water quality, and our quality of life. This starts with a landowner's perspective, and it's really everybody that's in Florida's perspective. My opinion is, if you pay any taxes in the United States of America, you're a landowner. The federal parks are not owned by a private family. Federal parks are owned by you, everybody that is out there that pays any taxes. When you come down to a state level and people talk about landowners, I always keep saying that every citizen that lives in Florida and pays taxes in Florida and uses those parks, whether it's Myakka State Park, which is which I think is one of the best state parks in Florida, you own a part of that land, and it's up to you to give guidance to what happens to that land and the land upstream, because a lot of ranchers and different ownerships are upstream of these pristine areas. So I think it's up to the politicians, it's up it's up to us as voters to then help decide how to protect those lands upstream to what we have already purchased and we're trying to take care of. So here's where we talk about, we get down in the weeds a little bit about these different programs. And before I do that, there's some people that I have worked with that have put up with a lot of questions from me, even though I have a background in real estate appraisal and real estate sales and real estate investments. This is part of what I do. Is when you get into conservation easements and you really need help, you need to make sure of what you are doing, what you are signing. It's easy to sell a house because when you sign that document, you know you'll never go back to that house and have a key to it. With a conservation easement, you're not giving away all your rights. You're giving away a portion of your rights, and most of them revolve around development rights. So if you're zoned one house for 10 acres and you own 1,000 acres, you know how many houses you can build on that piece of property, and you will be giving those up for money. So here's my shout out to all those that have listened to me and answered my questions and not gotten mad and been extremely helpful. With NRCS, which is a federal project, is Ronnie Gutierrez and Grinnell Francis and Russell Morgan. Thank you. You have helped tremendously as I'm walking through all these easements. Amy Phillips from DEP has been tremendously helpful at DEP for answering my questions, because that is a different conservation easement than, say, an NRCS federal easement. Then going to rural family lands, Jennifer Reed has been very helpful, very knowledgeable on answering my questions and trying to walk our way through all these easements. And there's one gentleman that brought essentially the whole group to the table at one of our places, where I'm managing partner at Blackbeard. I own Strickland Ranch, and managing partner at Blackbeard is Luis Gonzalez, and he's with Fish and Wildlife. And they have a land assistance program that helps ranchers at there. Also with Paul Gray from Audubon, that we've had a lot of questions on how do we do this, hydrology of water. And Paul Gray probably has more knowledge about Lake Okeechobee than anyone I know. He's great. So we're going to go over them one more time. Florida Forever. Florida Forever is administered through Department of Environmental Protection. They have conservation easement, and they're the ones that got the benefit of the money this year in the budget, approximately $100 million. Not all that's going to go for conservation easement. And they have a really great science-based criteria for selecting these properties to see which property needs to be on tier 1 on the top of the list, because it's very vital to Florida, quality of water, quantity of water, maybe connectivity with animals and with other conservation easements or state-owned properties. They may be that pieces. would connect all the dots, so to speak. Rural Family Lands Protection Program, they give you a little more latitude on what you can do with your property. Florida Forever, you're pretty much going to leave it the way it is in a pristine state and not be able to do a tremendous amount of conversion. But Rural Family Lands administered by Florida Department of Agriculture Consumer Services, of which Adam Putnam is our Commissioner of Agriculture. And Jennifer Reed does a great job at that program. And I know we've got a lot of folks that are in the conservation world, besides the ranchers that are here today. And we just lost a really great man that ran that program for years, and his name was John Brown, and we lost him last week. And so Jennifer is certainly having to pick up a lot of slack in that program. NRCS, the other big one in the state of Florida, besides Florida Forever, besides Rural Family Lands, is NRCS WRE Wetlands Program. And that is a federal program. And that is mainly for restoring the hydrology in wetlands, restoring wetlands. There's not much negotiation under that program. They have a set of rules, the criteria, and an amount to which they will give you an acre for, depending on where you live in the state. It's broken up in different areas. We recently did one of these WREs on the ranch there in Mayaca City, and they're great people to work with, and we're continuing to work with them. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for restoring wetlands, for looking at the wading birds, for looking at all of those areas that we're going to try to take back to a little wetter time before we started pulling all the ditches that we do. Fish and Wildlife Service has a land and conservation fund, fee simple easements, and it's mainly for national wildlife refuges. And so we have Bill Miller, and he's with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. He has also helped a lot. I've interacted with Bill Miller a lot here in Florida, and he is really a stand-up gentleman, just like the rest of them that I've named. There are some others that I'm going to mention. Just to mention them, we won't go into them, is the REPI Easements. That's a partner program with state and locals, and NRCS ALE program. Then there's also some possibilities for water management districts to do conservation easements, and many years ago they did quite a few of them. There's also county programs. In the audience today, we have a manager of about a 27,000 acre piece of property in Manatee County that was preserved by Manatee County, and they did a voter referendum to see if we would purchase it, and we did. We have the Forest Legacy Program. I happen to love maps. I just wanted to show everybody that is not familiar is where in the state of Florida we have active applications and vetted, if you will, projects. So the vetting was done by different groups. So under Florida Forever, right now we have approximately 2 million acres, and that's in orange. They do not have their easements yet. Those are willing sellers that have been through the process of showing their land, evaluating their land, and they're now on the list. The red is the Rural Family Lands, Florida Department of Protection Program. The Tier 1 list is approximately 237,000 acres. Those are willing sellers. There are some which overlap. So you will have Florida Forever and Rural Family Lands applications in for the same property, and then see which one has the funding to do it. The green, of course, is existing conservation lands, which is mainly parks, either county, state, or federal parks, or some conservation easements that have already been done. So when you start adding those up, you're going to easily get to 2.5 million acres that are willing sellers. And we got $5.8 million in funding for rural family lands this past year, and that doesn't go very far. We're going to have to work on that. I'm going to narrow it down just a little bit. This is the Charlotte Harbor watershed. This is where this and Northern Everglades is where our properties are, and we are down in the Myakka City area, and then we go a little further, but a little further north. But looking at this, and you see the Peace River, you see Prairie Creek, you see the Myakka, and you see all of the finger drainage that comes into the natural drains that come into that. So looking at this, this is a small snapshot of a portion of Florida that all of Florida looks like this. They just all are going to run to the Gulf eventually. Now, this gives you a little different view of that same area that goes into Charlotte Harbor, which a lot of people call the natural economic engine of Southwest Florida, because of all of the homes, all of the fishing, all the recreation that happened down there. Look at the red. That red is pretty much solid development, and I don't think that anybody on our board is anti-development. That what we're looking at with conservation easements is options for ranchers and options for the citizens of Florida to protect their Florida, their water, and that's it. So we're not anti-development at all. We're just looking for funding these options. But this is pretty indicative of also some of the opportunities of Northern Everglades area. If you look and see all of the green and the yellow colors in the middle of this area going into Charlotte Harbor, there's a large opportunity to do some projects in there with private landowners to protect our water quality and our water quantity. I think that Amendment 1 spoke to this. This is the desire. It's just how much of a desire is it, and how much are we going to fund it? So that opportunity is great here. Not so much from Lakeland down to the Hardy line, and not so much around Port Charlotte. You can see the red, but all those greens and those yellows are cow country and ranches. And those ranches are the next best thing to pristine land. So we're pretty close to Myakka State Park right here. There's not a tremendous amount of difference between Myakka State Park and the ranches, especially if you were to do a WRE and start restoring that hydrology, or some of these places, the stocking rate on these cattle is probably 1 to 20, 25 acres if they've got a lot of rough country in there. I don't know how much poop a cow does a day, but I can pretty much hold it right here. And that's 1 cow for every 20, 25 acres. And then you take that 25 acres and you could theoretically easily have 1,000 residents. So you can see the opportunities. I'm not saying that every piece needs to be preserved. I'm not saying that the government entities need to buy a lot of property. I'm just saying that you need options and there needs education. This is a little different picture of that same area, giving you the yellow Florida Forever projects. The red are the tier 1 projects. There's 2 tiers, and you always get rated. Remember, your property is probably like anybody else's property. They think it's the best. They think it's the most beautiful, and so we're going on from there. So this is kind of the same scenario with Orlando and the Northern Everglades. You can see the natural areas, the opportunities. You can see Avon Park, Kissimmee Prairie, 3 Lakes. You can see where we are there. There's a lot of opportunities. People are concerned with what's going into Lake Okeechobee. That's a pretty good shot. This is another shot of that same area. It gives some specifics, but again, these are options. These are a little, it's virtually the same one, but it shows in green existing conservation areas. Red is the NRCS easements, and of course, the whole thing drains into Lake Okeechobee. So we're getting down to it, and how many more minutes do I have, Andrea? 10 to talk. All right, great. Thank you, ma'am. Conservation easements. It's not for everybody. Conservation easements, it's not easy. Conservation easements, it's not quick. I do have a little background in real estate, buying, selling, financing, and use. And I have been blessed with some really great people that have assisted me and helped me along the way, looking at conservation easements, looking at the 3 or 4 different opportunities there are. Is an easement right for you? It may not be. Absolutely may not be. You may be in the wrong location. You may be in a location that the dirt is worth $50,000, $60,000 an acre, and it doesn't connect to anything, and it's not going to save the world, and they're not going to be able to probably afford it. So they're going to look at position, location, function of the land, how it's functioning now, what kind of state the land is in. Conservation easements are not going to be had quick and easy with a lot of money at the end. But I think that anybody that wants it and has the benefit of working with one of these programs is fortunate that your land ranked high. And if you want to do it for the right, for the right reasons, good for you. I think there's some great programs out there. How do I get started? I decided, you know what, my family and I talked, and I want to start looking at a conservation easement. Reach out to the different programs. I named 3 of them: the NRCS WRE program, the Florida Forever, and the Rural Family Lands program. Those are the easy ones. And then I also talked about Fish and Wildlife Service. I talked about counties. I talked about some other ones, but this will get anybody started, and you get my opinion. For what it's worth, it is a rancher's opinion. Learn as much as you can about the different programs. There's some great folks out there that can help. There's some great attorneys. There's some great CPAs. There's some great groups. There is a lot of opportunities for conservation easement if they will fund them. If they'll fund them, you just looked at 2.5 million acres of people that said, I want to sell. Program criteria. Look at every program and see what they're going to mandate if you do a conservation easement with them, that it may not be for you. You may not want that much oversight on your ranch, but you may really want to protect that area. I've talked to a lot of different people. About this, and some of them may own a 10,000 acre ranch and say, all I really want to protect is 1,000 acres in the back where 5 generations ago my family settled there, and we want to protect that forever. Go for it. Go for it. See what you can do. There's other ones that say, my kids may not want to do what I love, and I love this ranch, and I gave 3 generations, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother, and my great-grandfather, they worked their fingers to the bone for this place. I don't want to lose it. I want it to be part of their legacy. Go for it. You own it. Go for it. Decide what's best for your family and sit down with your family and talk about it, and talk about the restrictions. Conservation easements, here's the process. Applications, number 1, you're going to need help. I needed help. Not everybody can do this on their own. Site visits. You're going to have different groups that are going to come to your ranch, and they're going to look at your ranch. They're going to start analyzing your ranch. You're going to have to give presentations to those folks about your ranch, about what you do, how you work with the University of Florida and how many BMPs you have on the different ranches and how you adhere to the BMPs and how you've taken care of those wetlands and uplands, how you take care of the cattle. Crafting the language. Some of them have the ability to have negotiations and other ones don't, and that's where you need help. I needed help. There is a negotiation process in there to where if you may want 2 houses because you've got 2 kids left on a piece of property, you may want 3. You may not want any over here on this one. It just depends on what you want. Then comes the appraisal process. The appraisal process, if you've gone this far, comes an appraisal process. Let's just say you look at the appraisal and you decide to accept that appraisal. You feel like it's fair. Now comes a contract. You sign the contract. All of these are going to take 1 to 2 years to do. There's nothing quick about this. Then the cabinet is going to approve. That's why it's so important to elect a commissioner of agriculture, an attorney general, the chief financial officer, because not only the governor makes that decision, but all the rest of them sitting on that cabinet make a decision on whether or not your ranch is going to get approved or not. You're going to need help along this way. Appraisals are highest and best use. They are not based on the conservation value. If you think that my ranch is great because I've got wetlands on it, they're not going to value it just on those wetlands on these 2 programs, the 2 state programs. It's going to be a highest and best use. Then they're going to back into it. You really need during this process a great land representative. It might be your attorney, probably not, unless you have nothing but a land use attorney, and you need to have your CPA involved. The great unknown, here is the great unknown, is that the dollars you receive, and approximately 50% of what your ranch is, guess what? Perpetuity means perpetuity, which means forever. So you have just signed up your kids, your grandkids, into taking care of this land forever. So think about your family, the future ownership of that piece of dirt, and do they want to do it? Because if they don't want to do it, they're going to sell it to somebody else, which they can do. But during that contract negotiation period, you found out how many times you could split your ranch. If you have 2,000 acre please, you may not be able to split it under a federal easement, or you may under one of the other easements be able to split it one time and have 2 pieces. Keep all of that in mind. The future management. Just think about Melaleuca, Cogan's grass, tropical soda apple, all those things that we fight tooth and nail right now, and we need federal funding. Think about your kids 30 years from now, and who knows what's going to happen in the state of Florida, because we live in a state that everybody visits and they come from all over the world. We don't know what the next Melaleuca is going to be. It's your job as ranchers to take care of that. Put some money aside. Put some money aside on that. So even in a changing world, at 40 years from now, your ranch is now surrounded by development, and they don't allow burning. Think about that. Future cow prices. Here's the politics. 237,000 acres in rural family lands, 696,959, really over 2 million acres if you include the less than fee project. This is an investment. These programs are investment in our world, in Florida that we live in. So here's what I would say. Get involved with politicians. As the primary is coming up in just a week or so, right after that, the general election. It's never too late to get involved with the politics that make the decisions on funding these programs. If I said one thing, it would be that. Get involved, stay involved, and try to fund these programs. I think they're worthwhile programs and worthwhile options, but nothing turns around that big cog called government without funding. We have to have funding. And so we'll see where that goes. We have Florida Conservation Group has partnered with Florida Cattlemen's Association. Florida Cattlemen's Association helped build this building along with the Florida Cattlemen's Foundation. help to build the building we're in today. They are a great group. If you don't belong to the Cattlemen's Association, join. If you have any questions, go on the Florida Conservation Group website, info@floridaconserve.org, and see what they have on there and see how they can help. There are a lot of land reps out there that can help you get through this process. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Alex Johns, president of the Florida Cattlemen's Association, one of my really good friends and actually a business partner, in saying, in his words, share your passion for whatever it is. The cattle industry are doing these things. So I know that Alex Johns is sitting down there at the Seminole Tribe Reservation office looking at this. So Alex Johns, this is hashtag share your passion. And it's for Alex Johns, president of the Florida Cattlemen's Association. Thank you for your service, Alex. Here is the information. And Andrea is saying it's time for questions. So in this group, and I'd like to start here. In this group, is there any questions that I could help answer within this group? None whatsoever? Please. So the question was, we talked about large acreage, but I think I also mentioned small acreage also. By the way, I think I have one of the smallest easements in the state of Florida. I think I've got a 70-acre easement on Gilly Creek that now Senator Galvano, that's president of the Senate, helped me get that a long time ago. Yes, the answer is yes. Talk to them, see. You don't know where your property is, how it adjoins. I know there was one over here in DeSoto County. I think that was about 70 acres. Start out, and you can either get a land rep or you yourself contact those different entities and see. My belief is landscape level conservation is great, but there's opportunities that need to be there for everybody, no matter what size. At least go to the table, see what's available. So great question. Thanks. Yes, ma'am. Great question. And I don't know if anybody could hear it, but it's basically what assures us as landowners that the document we sign with the government is going to be the document that our grandchildren still adhere to 50 years from now? That's a great question. How old is the United States of America? There you go. We just started. It's an assurance by the government. It's like taking title to your home. There's eminent, I'm sure let's be honest, there's eminent domain. You took title to your home, and they're going to put a highway through, and for the greater good of the country, for the community, for the flow of commerce, that they use an eminent domain. I have not seen that, but I would not rule something like that out. Take that into consideration whenever you do a conservation easement. I would not worry about it. I would not lose sleep about it, but I would take that, do we trust the entity that's doing it? The Department of Ag has shown to be one of the most trustworthy in the agricultural world of any organization. State of Florida has done pretty well. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, those entities, their concern is conservation. But great question, by the way. Those are the kind of questions that you need to have with your attorney, with your CPA, and with your family? No, great question. Okay, anybody else? And let's see. I have small acreage. I would consider a 10-acre conservation easement. Would this be of interest? I would first go to the county that you live in and check with them because something like that may be conducive for a park. It may be conducive for a lot of other things. So I would first go to them, and then I would contact Florida Department of Agriculture and go through that and go through DEP. But the main thing is if you had a good land use planner to help you with that, would be able to answer those questions. The perpetuity and defensibility, this is a long one, but it's the one that came up. Thank you, Valerie. The perpetuity and defensibility of conservation easements are under threat throughout the state and very prominently in Central Florida. Does the Florida Conservation Group have an interest in protecting the integrity of conservation easements? The two water management districts will release easements all the time, weakening the institution. And the two water management districts that are brought up, I am honestly not aware of. But are we interested? Yeah, like any other group, we certainly are interested in that. And there's a lot of other environmental groups too. I don't have knowledge of that, so I'm trying to answer the question, and I'm not. But my apologies. But if you will send it in to info@Florida Conserve, we'll try to answer it. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. We've actually looked at several mitigation banks on our properties, and we may yet do one. So, there is some opportunities financially right now, and some of those folks that own conservation or mitigation banks before the recession hit did not do a whole lot of business for about 4, 5, 6 years, and I know several of them. As we were going through the process, we looked at the number of credits at different mitigation banks, and there were a lot at that time, but we're using them up pretty fast in this high growth state that we're in now. So yeah, mitigation bank is certainly worth looking at, depending on where your property is and what area of the state it is, where the development, where you can take advantage of that development. I don't know how say in the middle of one of our low growth counties, surrounded by low growth counties, how profitable it would be. But some of those mitigation banks that are in the right areas are back doing well again. But we're looking at those too. We're really looking for opportunities for ranchers to sustain their ranches. I think that's what most everybody wants. They want to keep their ranch, but have that ability, if a developer comes by, to sell an area of the ranch for development. But also, I think the voters showed that Amendment 1, that they truly believe in conserving a lot of Florida. And so you can see by these figures that 2.5 to 3 million acres of willing ranchers, and we've got one, and we're looking at 2 others right now. Actually, we have another one over by Duet State Park that we've got a small one with a water management district over there. So there's some opportunities. Any other questions?